The sun hung low over the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory, casting long shadows across the trading post where Boone Carter stood waiting. His weathered hands gripped the worn leather of his hat brim as he watched the stagecoach approach through clouds of red dust. 6 months of letters had led to this moment, 6 months of careful penmanship and growing affection for a woman he'd never met. Violet Thompson. Even her name suggested delicacy, like the pressed flowers she'd sent with her third letter. In the tintype photograph she'd included, she appeared slight and refined, with gentle eyes and hands folded primly in her lap. Everything a frontier rancher could hope for in a mail-order bride. The coach wheels groaned to a halt, and the driver called out, "Willow Creek Station, all passengers for Willow Creek." Boone straightened his vest and ran a hand through his dark hair. Around him, other folks gathered, merchants awaiting goods, families meeting relatives. But his eyes remained fixed on the coach door as it swung open. First came an elderly couple, then a traveling salesman. Boone's heart hammered against his ribs. Then she appeared. But this wasn't the delicate flower from the photograph. This woman filled the doorway with present strong shoulders, full figure, mahogany hair escaping from beneath a practical bonnet. Her dress, though clean and pressed, showed signs of hardware. Most striking were her eyes, not gentle at all, but fierce as a hawk's. Scanning the crowd with a sharp intelligence, she spotted him immediately. Perhaps it was the bouquet of wildflowers he clutched, or the way he stood apart from the others. Their eyes met, and something passed between them: recognition, confusion, and an inexplicable pull. The woman descended with surprising grace for her size, carpetbag in hand. She moved through the crowd with purpose, stopping directly before him. Up close, he could see the determination etched in every line of her face, the calluses on her hands that spoke of real work. "Mr. Carter!" Her voice was deeper than he'd imagined Violet's would be, roughened by prairie wind. "Yes, ma'am, I'm Boone Carter." He fumbled with the flowers. "These are for you, Miss Thompson." A shadow crossed her features. She took the bouquet with careful hands, inhaling their scent before meeting his eyes again. "Mr. Carter, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not Violet Thompson." The words hit him like a physical blow. He stepped back, confusion flooding through him. "I don't understand. The letters, the photograph." "I'm Ruby Thompson," she said, chin lifting with a mixture of defiance and something that might have been shame. "Violet's sister." The August heat suddenly felt oppressive. Boone's mind raced through possibilities. Had he been corresponding with the wrong sister? Had there been some postal mix-up? The crowd jostled around them, but he barely noticed. "Where is Violet?" The question came out harsher than he intended. Ruby's jaw tightened. "That's a conversation requiring privacy. Mr. Carter, perhaps we could—" She gestured vaguely away from the station. Suspicion crept up his spine. He'd heard stories, confidence games, marriage swindles targeting lonely ranchers. But something in Ruby's expression stopped him from walking away. Beneath the steel exterior, he glimpsed genuine distress. "My wagon's over yonder," he said finally, pointing to the sturdy buckboard waiting in the shade. "The ranch is 2 hours north." Ruby nodded, hefting her carpetbag. When he moved to take it from her, she waved him off. "I can manage." They walked to the wagon in tense silence. Boone's mind churned with questions, but the public setting held his tongue. He helped her onto the bench seat. She accepted this assistance with unexpected grace, then climbed up beside her. As they pulled away from the station, the prairie stretched endlessly before them. The only sounds were creaking wheels and the steady clop of hooves. Boone found himself stealing glances at his unexpected passenger. Everything about her was different from what he'd imagined: larger, stronger, more substantial. Where Violet's letters had been filled with poetry and pressed flowers, Ruby seemed built from harder stuff. "You're wondering if you've been played for a fool," Ruby said suddenly. breaking the silence. The thought crossed my mind. Can't say I blame you. She adjusted her bonnet against the afternoon sun. How much did Violet tell you about our family? She mentioned you, said you raised her after your parents passed. Ruby's laugh held no humor. That's one way to put it. I've been mother and father both since she was 12 and I was 16. Kept food on the table and the bank from taking the farm. Until last year, anyway. The bitterness in her voice sparked sympathy despite his wariness. She mentioned difficulties. That's part of why she answered my advertisement. Did she now? Ruby turned to study him, those hawk eyes taking his measure. Tell me, Mr. Carter, what exactly did my sister promise you? Heat crept up his neck. A partnership, a helpmate for the ranch. Children, God willing. The usual arrangement. The usual arrangement, Ruby repeated softly. And you prepared for her arrival, made ready for a bride. I did. He couldn't hide the defensive note. Fixed up the house, bought proper furnishings, even had Mrs. Henderson from town helped me pick out some female necessities. Ruby's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You're a decent man, aren't you? That's going to make this harder. Make what harder? But she'd turned away, watching the landscape roll by. They passed through stands of cottonwood and across a narrow creek. His ranch lay in good country sheltered valley, year-round water, grass enough for a substantial herd. He'd built it from nothing over 8 years, fighting weather, Indians, and rustlers. All that was missing was a family to make it complete. The house came into view as they crested the final ridge. Pride swelled in his chest despite everything. The 2-story frame structure stood solid and welcoming, fresh whitewash gleaming in the late afternoon sun. The barn and outbuildings were equally well maintained. Even the garden plot showed careful attention, ready for a woman's touch. You built this? Ruby asked, genuine admiration creeping into her voice. Every board and nail, well, had help with the barn raising, but the house is all mine. It's beautiful. The words seemed pulled from her reluctantly. Violet she'd have loved it. Would have, past tense. His hands tightened on the reins as they pulled into the yard. His ranch hands. Sam and young Tom emerged from the bunkhouse. Clearly curious about the woman on the wagon seat, Boone waved them back to work. Inside the house, Ruby stood in the front parlor, taking in the efforts he'd made. New curtains at the windows, a rag rug on the polished floor, even a rocking chair positioned by the hearth. On the mantel sat a small daguerreotype frame, waiting for a wedding portrait. You really were ready for her, Ruby said quietly. I was ready for a wife, Boone corrected. Now I'd like to know why I'm standing here with her sister instead. Ruby set down her carpetbag and removed her bonnet, revealing hair the color of dark honey. She moved to the window, gathering her thoughts. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of confession. The letters you received. Violet didn't write them. I did. The floor seemed to shift beneath his feet. You wrote them, the poems, the pressed flowers. All of it. Violet can barely write her own name. Oh, she can read well enough, and she's clever in her way. But writing, Ruby shrugged. That fell to me, like everything else. So you've been deceiving me from the start? She whirled to face him, eyes flashing. I was trying to save my family. The bank was taking the farm. Violet's beautiful. You saw her photograph. I thought if she could make a good marriage, maybe we'd all survive. She agreed to it. Or seemed to. I wrote what I thought a man would want to hear. And the photograph was truly her. That much wasn't a lie. Boone sank into the nearest chair, head spinning. If she agreed to it, where is she? Ruby's fierce expression crumbled. She looked suddenly exhausted, every one of her years showing. That's what I need to tell you. Violet's gone. Mr. Carter. And we're all in terrible danger because of it. The words hung in the air between them, Outside, the everyday sounds of the ranch continued: horses nickering, the distant low of cattle. But inside the house that Boone had prepared with such hope, two strangers faced each other across a chasm of deception and looming threat. "I think," Boone said slowly, "you'd better tell me everything, from the beginning." Ruby nodded, sinking onto the settee he'd purchased just the week before. "It started 3 days ago, when a man named Marcus Dalton rode into our town." Ruby's hands trembled as she accepted the glass of water Boone offered. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the parlor floor. She took a steadying sip before continuing her tale. Marcus Dalton arrived in Cedar Falls 3 days ago, dressed like a gentleman and spending money like he had plenty to spare. He took rooms at the finest hotel, bought rounds at the saloon, and made himself known to everyone who mattered. Her voice carried a mixture of anger and fear, including Violet. Boone remained standing, arms crossed, fighting to control his growing alarm. "Go on." "He seemed to know things about you, about the marriage arrangement. At first, I thought perhaps he was just another traveler passing through. But then he began calling on Violet specifically, filling her head with stories." "What kind of stories?" Ruby met his eyes directly. "That you were a fraud, Mr. Carter, that you'd done this before, advertised for brides, brought them out to isolated ranches, and then—" She paused, color rising in her cheeks. "He claimed you sold them to mining camps as entertainment for the workers." The accusation hit Boone like a sledgehammer. He jerked back, rage flooding through him. "That's a damn lie." "I know that now," Ruby said quickly. "But Violet, she's always been impressionable. Beautiful as a picture, but naive as a newborn calf. Dalton showed her papers, documents that looked official, said he was investigating you for the territorial authorities." Boone's mind raced. The name Marcus Dalton rang familiar, like a bell tolling in the distance. He moved to the window, staring out at his peaceful ranch while memory stirred. Dalton, Marcus Dalton, medium height, dark hair, scar through his left eyebrow. "You know him. If it's the same man, we served together in the war. Same regiment, different companies. He was drummed out for selling army supplies to Confederate sympathizers." Boone turned back to face her. "Haven't heard the name in years, but a snake like that doesn't change his skin." Ruby's expression grew even more troubled. "Then it's worse than I thought. He didn't just turn Violet against you, he convinced her to run away with him. Said he'd protect her, take her somewhere safe." "When?" 2 nights ago. I woke to find her gone, along with her few valuables, and—" Ruby reached into her pocket, withdrawing a sealed envelope. "This was on her pillow. She'd taken one other thing too, a letter that came for you last month. I'd held it back, planning to give it to Violet to bring as part of her trousseau." Boone took the envelope with Violet's name scrolled across it in flowery script. Inside, the message was brief but devastating. Asterisk, "Dearest Ruby, Mr. Dalton has shown me the truth about Boone Carter. I cannot marry such a man. By the time you read this, I'll be far away and safe. Mr. Dalton says Carter has powerful friends who help him cover his crimes, so going to the law would be useless. Please don't try to find me. Your loving sister, Violet Asterisk." "She's in danger," Boone said flatly. "Whatever game Dalton's playing, it's not about protecting your sister." "I know," Ruby's voice cracked. "That's why I came. I hoped maybe you'd know what he was after. The letter she took, do you know what it might have contained?" Boone frowned, thinking back. "I get business correspondence regular-like, some from the Army about my pension, occasional letters from buyers back east. Nothing special that I recall." Dalton seemed to know exactly what he was looking for. Violet mentioned he asked specifically about your mail, whether you'd received anything from the territorial capital recently. A chill ran down Boone's spine. Last month, there had been a letter from the territorial office, something about surveying for the planned railroad extension. He'd filed it away without much thought, But now, the railroad, he breathed. They're planning to run a line through this area, sent out notices to all the landowners. Ruby leaned forward. Your land is in the path. Not directly, but close enough to be valuable if a town springs up. I didn't think much of it. They've been talking about that railroad for years. He began pacing, pieces falling into place. But if someone knew the exact route, knew which parcels would become valuable, they could force out the current owners and buy cheap before the news becomes public. Ruby finished. And what better way to force you out than with criminal charges? The full scope of the plan crystallized in Boone's mind. Frame me for crimes against women, have me arrested or run out of the territory, then swoop in and buy the land for pennies on the dollar. Dalton always was clever with schemes. But why take Violet? Witness, living proof of my supposed crimes. She believes his lies, so she'll testify to whatever he tells her. Boone's hands clenched into fists. He's probably got other victims lined up too. Women who'll swear I lured them out here. Ruby stood abruptly, moving with surprising grace for her size. Then we need to find them before he can put his plan in motion. Violet may be foolish, but she's still my sister. And now that I've led you into this mess, you didn't lead me anywhere. Boone interrupted. This was brewing before you wrote that first letter. Dalton must have been watching, waiting for an opportunity. The marriage advertisement gave him the perfect opening. How did he even know about it? The papers where you advertised are hundreds of miles from Cedar Falls. Boone's expression darkened. That's a very good question. Someone's been feeding him information. Someone who knew about the advertisement, the letters, maybe even the railroad survey. The sound of approaching horses cut through their conversation. Boone moved swiftly to the window, hand instinctively going to where his gun belt usually hung. 3 riders were coming up the drive, and even from a distance, he could see the glint of a badge. Sheriff Morrison, he said quietly, with 2 deputies I don't recognize. Ruby joined him at the window. They're not here for a social call. No. Boone's mind worked rapidly. Morrison had always been friendly enough. But law was law. If someone had filed charges, there's a loaded Winchester in the kitchen, and my Colt is in the desk drawer. Can you shoot? Better than most men, Ruby replied without boasting. Daddy taught me young, and I kept in practice. Despite everything, Boone found himself impressed. Good, but let's hope it doesn't come to that. Stay inside unless things go bad. He stepped out onto the porch as the riders entered the yard. Sheriff Morrison, a heavy-set man with graying whiskers, remained mounted while his deputies dismounted and spread out slightly, a tactical position Boone recognized all too well. Afternoon, Sheriff, Boone called out, keeping his hands visible and relaxed. What brings you out this way? Morrison's usually jovial face was grim. Afraid this ain't a friendly visit. Boone, got some serious charges been filed against you. That's so by whom? Man named Marcus Dalton, representing himself as an agent for the Territorial Commission on Women's Welfare. Morrison shifted in his saddle. Says you've been luring women out here under false pretenses. Got affidavits from 2 women claiming you held them against their will. And you believed him. Boone kept his voice level, though anger simmered beneath. You've known me 8 years. Morrison, ever known me to mistreat anyone, let alone women? What I know and what I got to do as sheriff are 2 different things. Morrison's hand rested on his gun butt. I got papers here, all legal-like. Need to bring you in for questioning. Those papers based on lies. Sheriff, Dalton's running a confidence game. Maybe so, but that's for a judge to decide. You coming peaceful, or do we have a problem? One of the deputies, a narrow-faced man with cold eyes, had shifted position to have a clear shot at the door. The other watched the bunkhouse where Sam and Tom had emerged, drawn by the commotion. Sheriff. Ruby's voice came from behind Boone as she stepped onto the porch. I'm Ruby Thompson, and I can shed some light on this situation. Morrison's eyebrows rose.
Ma'am, I'd advise you to stay out of this.
Can't do that, seeing as I'm the one who's been corresponding with Mr. Carter these past 6 months. I can prove every word, mister. Dalton told you is a lie. The narrow-faced deputy spoke up. Sheriff, we got our orders. Don't matter what some woman claims.
Since when do you give the sheriff orders?
Boone asked quietly, studying the man. Don't recall seeing you before. Deputy. Morrison's face flushed. These men were assigned by the territorial office to help with this investigation. Now, Boone.
Assigned by who exactly? Ruby interrupted. By the same office that supposedly sent Mr. Dalton. Seems mighty convenient. All these strangers showing up at once with papers and accusations. The narrow-faced deputy's hand moved toward his gun. Sheriff, we're wasting time. Everything happened at once. The deputy drew his weapon. Morrison shouted a warning, and Boone shoved Ruby back through the doorway as gunfire erupted. A bullet splintered the doorframe where Ruby had been standing. From inside, Ruby's Winchester boomed. The narrow-faced deputy spun and fell. His partner fired wildly before Sam and Tom opened up from the bunkhouse, forcing him to dive for cover. "Hold your fire!" Morrison roared. But the damage was done. The sheriff had his gun out but seemed unsure where to point it. Confusion clear on his face. "Your deputies just tried to murder us. Morrison," Boone shouted from the doorway. "You still think this is about lawful arrest?" The second deputy made a break for his horse. Tom's rifle cracked, and the man tumbled from his saddle. In the sudden silence that followed, Morrison sat frozen, face pale with shock. "They weren't supposed to," he began, then stopped. "Dalton said you were dangerous, might resist. Said these men were experienced in bringing in violent criminals. And you didn't think to verify that check their credentials." Ruby emerged, Winchester still in hand. "Sheriff, you've been played for a fool, just like my sister." Morrison dismounted slowly, hands visible, his face a mix of anger and shame. The two fallen deputies lay still in the dusty yard, their blood seeping into the hard-packed earth. Sam and Tom kept their rifles ready but pointed downward. "I need to see those bodies," Morrison said heavily, "and then we need to talk." Ruby kept her Winchester trained on the sheriff as he examined the fallen men. When Morrison pulled back the first deputy's coat, his expression darkened. "This one's carrying 2 hideout guns and a knife I wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley. These aren't lawmen's weapons." "Check his pockets," Boone suggested. Morrison found a roll of bills, a flask of whiskey, and a folded paper. His face went white as he read. "It's a receipt from the Golden Eagle Saloon in Cheyenne, for services rendered, dated 2 days ago." "Let me guess," Ruby said, "signed by Marcus Dalton." "Near enough. D with a flourish." Morrison moved to the second body, finding similar damning evidence. When he stood, his usual commanding presence had deflated. "Boone, I've made a terrible mistake." "Nearly a fatal one," Ruby observed coolly. "Now, Sheriff, I think it's time you heard the whole truth." They moved inside, Sam and Tom dealing with the bodies. Ruby reached into her traveling bag and withdrew a leather-bound journal, its pages worn from use. "I started keeping this when Violet began acting strange. About 2 weeks ago. Every meeting with Dalton, every conversation I overheard." She opened to a marked page. "Here 3 days before he approached Violet directly. Dalton met with someone at the hotel. I was delivering eggs to the kitchen and saw them through the parlor window." Morrison leaned forward. "Who?" "The man wore a long coat and kept his hat low, but when he turned to leave, I saw his profile clear as day." Ruby met Morrison's eyes steadily. "It was your deputy, Calvin Briggs." "Calvin's been with me 2 years, Morrison protested, but doubt crept into his voice. "Has he now?" Boone interjected. "And how often does he ride out on personal business?"
How many times has he been conveniently absent when rustlers hit the small ranchers? Morrison's face flushed darker.
You suggesting my own deputy is involved in this?
Ruby flipped pages. August 10th, Briggs seen at the Western Union office. August 12th, private conversation with land agent Harold Crenshaw. August 15th, another meeting with the stranger in the long coat. She looked up. Sheriff, your deputy has been gathering information and passing it along. Who else would know about Boone's mail-order bride arrangement? Who else could arrange for those fake deputies to arrive just when needed? The sheriff sank into a chair, suddenly looking older. Calvin always was ambitious, always talking about moving up, maybe running for sheriff himself when I retire. Or sooner, if you got killed trying to arrest a dangerous criminal, Boone suggested grimly. A sound outside made them all tense. Hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching fast. Sam's voice called out a warning from the yard. Morrison stood, hand on his gun. That'll be Calvin now. I told him to follow with the prison wagon. His jaw set with determination. Let me handle this. I may have been a fool, but I'm still the law here. The law that nearly got us killed, Ruby reminded him. Which is why I aim to set things right. Morrison moved toward the door, then paused. That journal of yours, Miss Thompson, you wouldn't happen to mention where these meetings talked about finding your sister. Ruby's expression softened slightly. Miller's Canyon was mentioned twice. Something about a cabin there being prepared for special guests. I know the place. Old mining camp. Mostly abandoned. Morrison's hand tightened on his gun. Used to be run by Big Jack Miller before he got himself hanged for claim jumping. Perfect spot to hide someone. The hoofbeats grew louder. Through the window, they could see 4 riders approaching Deputy Briggs in the lead, followed by 3 hard-looking men. That's not the prison wagon, Boone observed. No, Morrison agreed. It's not. He looked back at Ruby and Boone. When this goes bad and it will you two light out the back, get to Judge Chen in town. He's federal, not territorial, and straight as they come, tell him everything. We're not leaving you to face them alone, Ruby said firmly. This is my mess to clean up. Morrison checked his revolver. Besides, someone needs to stay alive to testify. But Ruby was already moving, not toward the back door, but to the window overlooking the side approach. Mr. Carter, how many rifles do you have? 4, plus handguns. Good. Sheriff, you'll want to step out and greet your deputy like nothing's wrong. Buy us time to position. She glanced at Boone. You ever fight Indians? Plenty. You thinking crossfire? Exactly. Sam and Tom already have the barn covered. We take the windows, catch them in the open if they try anything. Morrison shook his head. Miss Thompson, I can't ask civilians to. You're not asking. We're volunteering. Ruby's tone brooked no argument. My sister's out there somewhere, scared and in danger because of these men. I won't run. The riders had reached the yard. Through the window, they could see Briggs dismounting, his hand hovering near his gun. The 3 men with him spread out in a practiced manner that spoke of experience in violence. Morrison stepped onto the porch, managing a casual wave. Calvin, thought you were bringing the wagon. Change of plans. Sheriff, Briggs' voice carried clearly. These gentlemen have new information about Carter. Seems he's more dangerous than we thought. That's so. Morrison kept his tone conversational, though Boone could see the tension in his shoulders. Maybe we should discuss this information. Nothing to discuss. Briggs moved closer, his companions flanking him. Where is he? Inside. Had a bit of trouble with those deputies from the territorial office. Briggs' face tightened. What kind of trouble? The kind where they drew on unarmed folks and got themselves shot. Morrison's hand drifted toward his gun. Funny thing, Calvin, they weren't real deputies at all, just hired guns carrying fake papers. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Briggs's eyes darted to his companions, reading their readiness. Now, Sheriff, I'm sure there's an explanation. Oh, there is. Morrison's voice hardened. Just like there's an explanation for your meetings with Marcus Dalton, for all those private telegrams, for selling out honest folks to land grabbers and confidence men. Briggs went for his gun. Morrison was fast for a big man, but age and surprise worked against him. His shot went wide as Briggs's bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him back against the porch rail. The yard erupted in gunfire. Ruby's Winchester spoke from the window. Dropping one of Briggs' men, Boone fired from the other window, forcing the others to scatter for cover. From the barn, Sam and Tom opened up, their shots kicking up dust around the attackers' feet. Briggs dove behind the water trough, snapping shots at the windows. His remaining men found cover behind Morrison's horse and an overturned wagon that had been awaiting repair. "Morrison's hit," Ruby called out, never taking her eyes from her targets. "I see him. Cover me!" Boone burst from the door, firing steadily as he dragged the wounded sheriff inside. Blood soaked Morrison's shirt, but he was conscious and cursing. "Get that journal to Judge Chen." Morrison gasped. "Evidence. Dalton's whole scheme." Ruby fired again, her shot splintering wood inches from Briggs's head. "They're trying to flank us." One attacker was indeed working his way along the side of the house. Tom's rifle cracked from the barn, and the man stumbled and fell. Calvin, one of the remaining gunmen, called out, "This ain't worth dying for." "Shut up and shoot," Briggs responded. But desperation edged his voice. They were outnumbered, outpositioned, and rapidly running out of options. Ruby suddenly stood fully in the window, drawing their fire. As bullets shattered glass around her, she coolly aimed and fired. Her shot caught the man behind Morrison's horse, who collapsed with a cry. "Damn fool woman," Boone shouted, pulling her down. "You trying to get killed?" "I'm trying to end this," she retorted, already reloading. "My sister needs us alive and victorious, not hiding behind walls." A white cloth appeared above the water trough. "Hold fire," Briggs called. "I'm coming out." "Throw out your guns first," Boone commanded. A pistol and rifle sailed into the open. Briggs emerged, hands high, his face a mask of defeat and fury. Blood trickled from a gash on his cheek where flying splinters had caught him. "Smart choice, Calvin," Morrison managed from his position on the floor. "Though it won't save you from the rope." As Sam and Tom secured Briggs, Ruby knelt beside Morrison, using strips torn from her petticoat to bind his wound. Her hands were steady, experienced. "You've done this before," Boone observed. "Farm accidents, hunting mishaps. You learn or people die." She glanced up at him. "He'll live if we get him to town quick enough." "First, we get answers." Boone hauled Briggs inside, forcing him into a chair. "Where's Dalton? Where's he keeping the girl?" Briggs remained silent until Boone drew his Colt and placed it against the man's knee. "I'm not a patient man, Calvin, not when innocent women are in danger." "Miller's Canyon." Briggs broke. "The old superintendent's house. Dalton's got it fixed up nice, planning to use it as a base while he buys up the land." "How many men?" 6, maybe 8. He's got the girl and her brother grab the boy to keep her in line." Ruby's face went white. "Thomas! He took Thomas too." She stood slowly, and something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "Sheriff, I'll need to borrow your badge." Morrison managed a weak laugh. "What for?" "Because when I kill Marcus Dalton, I want it to be legal." Judge Theodore Chen's courthouse office was sparse but dignified, with law books lining the walls and a portrait of President Grant overlooking his mahogany desk. The federal judge, a man in his 50s with silver threading through his dark hair, listened intently as Ruby finished recounting their tale. "This journal," he said, examining Ruby's detailed notes, "combined with Sheriff Morrison's testimony and the evidence from the dead gunman, provides substantial proof of conspiracy." He looked up sharply. "Deputy Briggs has agreed to testify." After some persuasion, Boone confirmed. He's more scared of hanging than of Dalton. Judge Chen nodded slowly. I can issue federal warrants immediately. This goes beyond territorial jurisdiction kidnapping, conspiracy to defraud, attempted murder of peace officers. He began writing swiftly. I'll also telegraph the Ura Marshal's office, though their nearest men are 2 days away. We don't have 2 days, Ruby said firmly.
My sister and brother are in danger now.
Miss Thompson, I understand your concern, but charging into Miller's Canyon against 8 armed men would be foolish. Your Honor, Morrison interrupted from his chair, his shoulder heavily bandaged by Doc Winters. I'm deputizing these folks, making it official-like. They've already proven themselves in a gunfight, and they've got personal stake in this. Judge Chen frowned. You're in no condition to lead a posse, Sheriff.
Don't plan to, but I can still swear in deputies.
Morrison's good hand gestured to Boone and Ruby.
These two, plus Sam and Tom from the Carter Ranch, that gives them legal authority. And me,
a new voice said from the doorway. A lean man with weathered features and a marshal's star entered. James Hartley, federal marshal, was passing through on other business when I heard the commotion. Ruby studied him suspiciously. Convenient timing, Marshal. Hartley smiled grimly. Not really. I've been tracking Marcus Dalton for 6 months. He pulled similar schemes in Colorado and Kansas. When I heard his name mentioned, I came running.
Then you'll help us?
Boone asked.
Try to stop me. That snake has slipped away twice before. Not this time.
Hartley looked to Judge Chen. With your warrants and my federal authority, we can end this legally and permanently. Chen signed the warrants with a flourish. Done. But I want Dalton alive if possible. He needs to answer for all his crimes, not just the ones here. Within an hour, their small posse had assembled, besides Boone, Ruby, and Marshal Hartley. They had Sam and Tom from the ranch, plus 2 townsmen Morrison vouched for the Baxter brothers, former cavalry soldiers who'd settled in the area. Ruby had changed into riding clothes, borrowed from the general store split skirt, sturdy boots, and a man's shirt that fit her strong frame better than expected. She carried Morrison's loaned Winchester and wore a determined expression that made even hardened men step aside.
You sure about this?
Boone asked quietly as they prepared to ride.
No one would think less of you for staying behind.
Ruby's eyes flashed.
Would you stay behind if it was your family?
No. Then don't insult me by suggesting I should. They rode out as the sun peaked overhead. Taking the old mining road toward Miller's Canyon, Marshal Hartley had questioned Briggs thoroughly, extracting details about the cabin's layout and guard positions. The superintendent's house sat in a box canyon with only one good approach, a tactical nightmare for attackers.
Dalton always did like having his back protected,
Boone muttered as they studied the crude map Briggs had drawn. Also means he can't run easily, Hartley pointed out.
One way in, one way out.
Unless he goes over the ridge, Sam suggested.
Tough climb, but possible on foot.
Ruby listened to their planning with growing impatience.
While we're sitting here talking, my brother and sister are captives. Thomas is only 14.
Which is why we do this right, Hartley said firmly. Rushing in gets hostages killed. Dalton won't hesitate to use them as shields if cornered. They made camp that evening 5 miles from the canyon. Cold rations only to avoid smoke. Ruby sat apart, cleaning her rifle with mechanical precision. Boone approached with coffee.
Thank you,
she said, accepting the tin cup.
For not treating me like some helpless female.
Haven't seen much helpless about you. He settled beside her.
That shooting back at the ranch, where'd you learn to stay so calm under fire?
When you're responsible for everything and everyone, you learn not to panic. She sipped the bitter coffee. After our parents died, I had creditors circling like vultures. More than once, I had to run them off with a shotgun. You get used to standing your ground. And your sister. Ruby's expression softened.
Violet was 12 when the fever took our folks. Still young enough to be protected from the worst of it. I made sure she had pretty dresses, schooling, all the things a young lady should have. Maybe I protected her too much. You did what you thought best. Did I? Ruby's voice turned bitter. I turned her into someone who couldn't tell truth from lies, who'd follow any smooth-talking man promising rescue. If I'd made her face reality instead of sheltering her, then she wouldn't be Violet, Boone said gently. We can't remake people, Ruby. We can only love them as they are. She looked at him sharply. Speaking from experience. Had a younger brother once, always trying to make him more careful, more responsible. He died in the war anyway, not from being reckless, just bad luck and a Confederate shell. Boone stared into the darkness. Spent years wishing I'd let him be himself instead of always correcting him. They sat in comfortable silence, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them. Finally, Ruby spoke again. When this is over, when Violet and Thomas are safe, what then? The marriage arrangement is obviously void. Is it? Boone kept his voice neutral. Seems to me I've been corresponding with you all along, getting to know you through those letters, even if I thought they were from Violet. Ruby turned to face him fully. You can't be serious. I deceived you. To save your family. Can't say I wouldn't have done similar in your place. He met her gaze steadily. Besides, the woman in those letters strong, clever, caring, that was you. The poetry might have been flowery, but the heart behind it was real. I'm not Violet, Ruby said firmly. I'm not delicate or refined. I've got rough hands and a sharp tongue. I'm built for work, not for pretty dresses and social calls. Good thing I need a partner more than an ornament then. Before Ruby could respond, Hartley appeared from the darkness. Best get some rest. We move at first light. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it a cold wind that cut through their coats. They approached Miller's Canyon with careful precision, leaving the horses hidden and continuing on foot. The canyon walls rose steep and forbidding, red rock catching the early sun. Through field glasses, they could see the cabin, a sturdy two-story structure built from local stone. Smoke rose from the chimney, and 2 guards patrolled the porch. There, Sam whispered, pointing. Window on the 2nd floor, bars on it. Ruby grabbed the glasses, focusing on the barred window. A pale face appeared briefly Violet, her golden hair unmistakable even at distance. She's alive, Ruby breathed, relief flooding through her. Question is, where's the boy? Hartley muttered. They watched for another hour, noting guard changes and counting men. 6 visible, possibly more inside. Dalton himself appeared once, stepping onto the porch to speak with the guards, even from distance. His arrogant bearing was obvious. All right, Hartley decided. Here's how we play it. The Baxter brothers circle around. Get position on the ridge for covering fire. Sam and Tom take the left approach. Use those rocks for cover. Boone and I go straight up the middle. Try to parlay. Ruby. Goes with you, she interrupted. Dalton took my family. I'll face him directly. Hartley looked ready to argue, but Boone spoke up. She's earned the right, Marshal. Fine, but we do this smart. No heroics, no revenge shots. We want them alive to stand trial. They moved into position as the sun climbed higher. Ruby's heart pounded as they approached the cabin openly, hands visible but ready. The guards spotted them immediately, rifles swinging to cover their approach. That's far enough, one called out. State your business. Hartley's voice carried clear and authoritative. Federal Marshal, I've got warrants for Marcus Dalton and associates. Send him out. Movement erupted from the cabin. Men took positions at windows, rifle barrels appearing like deadly flowers. Dalton himself stepped onto the porch, well-dressed despite the circumstances, a confident smile playing at his lips. Marshal Hartley, he called out pleasantly, still chasing shadows. I see. What brings you to my humble retreat? You know damn well what, Hartley responded.
Kidnapping, conspiracy, attempted murder. It's over. Dalton. Is it? Dalton's smile widened. I think you'll find things aren't quite so simple. He gestured, and two men emerged from the cabin, dragging a struggling figure between them. Thomas, his young face bruised but defiant. Ruby started forward instinctively, but Boone's hand on her arm stopped her. Dalton noticed the movement, his eyes lighting with interest.
Ah, the formidable Miss Thompson. I presume your sister speaks highly of you, when she's not crying for rescue. That is—
Let them go, Ruby called out, her voice steady despite her rage.
Their innocence in this—
Innocent, Dalton laughed. Your sister came to me willingly, eager to escape the marriage you arranged. As for the boy, well, he's insurance. Amazing how cooperative people become when family is at stake. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Thomas struggled against his captors, earning a cuff to the head that made Ruby's hands clench on her rifle. The boy's defiant glare never wavered, even as blood trickled from his split lip. Enough games. Dalton, Marshal Hartley called out. You're surrounded. The territorial governor knows about your land scheme. Even if you kill us all, you'll never see a profit from it. Dalton's confident facade cracked slightly. You're bluffing. Am I? Deputy Briggs sang like a church choir. We have documents, witnesses, the whole conspiracy laid bare. Hartley took a step forward. But I'm willing to deal. Release the hostages, surrender peacefully, and I'll recommend leniency to the judge. Leniency, Dalton laughed bitterly. For what, 20 years instead of hanging? I think not. Marshal? From the ridge above, a rifle shot cracked. One of Dalton's guards spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. The Baxter brothers had announced their presence. That's your answer to negotiation, Dalton snarled, dragging Thomas in front of him as a shield. That wasn't us, Hartley shouted. But the damage was done. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions as Dalton's men opened up. Ruby, Boone, and Hartley dove for cover behind a cluster of boulders. Damn fool Baxters, Hartley muttered, snapping off return shots. I said wait for the signal. Ruby ignored the bullets whining overhead, focusing on the cabin. Through the chaos, she could see Thomas being dragged back inside, at the upstairs window. Violet's terrified face appeared again before someone yanked her away. We need to get closer, Ruby said. They'll ford up now, maybe hurt the hostages. Too much open ground, Boone replied, reloading. They'll cut us down. But Ruby was already moving. She broke from cover, zigzagging across the dusty ground as bullets kicked up dirt around her feet. Her split skirt allowed her to run with surprising speed. The Winchester clutched tight. Damn it, Ruby! Boone roared, laying down covering fire. She made it to a wooden water trough 20 yards from the porch, sliding behind it as splinters flew. From this position, she had a better angle on the cabin's side entrance. Sam and Tom had engaged from the left, their steady fire keeping several guards pinned. The remaining Baxter brother on the ridge worked his rifle with methodical precision, forcing Dalton's men to keep their heads down. Ruby peered around the trough. The side door was barely visible, but she could see it was unguarded, everyone focused on the main threats. If she could reach it. A figure burst from behind the cabin's corner, one of Dalton's men trying to flank their position. Ruby swung her rifle and fired in one smooth motion. The man dropped, his weapon clattering across the stones. Nice shot. Boone had somehow reached her position, breathing hard. Though running off like that nearly gave me heart failure. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Ruby admitted. She pointed to the side door. We get inside, we can reach Violet and Thomas. Or get ourselves killed in close quarters. But Boone was already judging the distance. All right. On 3. They burst from cover together, Hartley and the others increasing their fire to provide distraction. The 20 yards to the door felt like miles, but they reached it unscathed. Boone kicked it open, leading with his Colt. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight. They found themselves in a kitchen, well-stocked and recently used. Coffee still steamed on the stove. No guards yet. Footsteps pounded overhead. Shouting voices. Dalton's rising above the rest. "Watch the prisoners if they breach the main room. Use the girl." "Upstairs," Ruby whispered. They moved through the kitchen into a hallway. The main room was visible through an archway. 4 men crouched at windows, exchanging fire with the posse outside. Dalton stood near the stairs, revolver in hand. A narrow servant stair led upward from the kitchen. Ruby pointed, and Boone nodded. They climbed carefully, each creak of the old wood making them freeze. At the top, another hallway with 3 doors. The first room was empty. The second held supplies and ammunition. Behind the third door, they could hear muffled sobbing Violet. Ruby tried the handle. Locked, of course. She stepped back, ready to kick it in, when Boone stopped her. Too loud. He produced a thin piece of metal from his pocket, working it into the lock. Skill from my misspent youth. The lock clicked open. Inside, they found Violet huddled on a narrow bed, her pretty face streaked with tears. Thomas sat beside her, hands bound but eyes alert. A single guard stood by the barred window, his attention on the gunfight outside. The guard started to turn, mouth opening to shout warning. Ruby's rifle butt caught him in the temple, dropping him unconscious before he could make a sound.
"Ruby?"
Violet gasped, then threw herself into her sister's arms.
"I thought Dalton said you were dead."
"Hush now," Ruby soothed, even as she worked to untie Thomas. "We're getting you out." "About time," Thomas muttered, rubbing his wrists. Despite his bravado, relief shone in his young eyes. "I knew you'd come." "Can you both walk climb if needed?" Boone asked, watching the door. Violet nodded shakily.
"I'm not hurt, just frightened."
"The window," Ruby decided.
"Those bars, Thomas, help me."
Together, they wrenched at the bars. Years of weather had weakened the mortar, and with desperate strength, they pulled one free. Then another. The opening was narrow, but manageable. "There's a shed roof below," Boone reported, peering out. "Then a drop to the ground. Violet, you first." "I can't the height."
"You can and you will,"
Ruby said firmly. "Would you rather face Dalton?" That decided it. Violet squeezed through the window, Boone helping her onto the shed roof. Thomas followed with the agility of youth. Ruby prepared to follow when footsteps thundered in the hallway. "Go!" Boone shoved her toward the window. The door burst open. Dalton stood there, face twisted with rage. Gun raised. "You've ruined everything." Boone moved faster than thought. Tackling Dalton as the gun fired, the bullet went wide, shattering the window frame. They crashed into the hallway, wrestling for the weapon. Ruby hesitated at the window, torn between escape and helping Boone. Then she saw Violet and Thomas on the ground below, Marshall Hartley protecting them, and made her choice. She turned back to the fight. Dalton had managed to throw Boone off, scrambling for his fallen gun. Ruby didn't hesitate. Her rifle cracked, and Dalton's gun hand exploded in red. He screamed, clutching the wounded appendage.
"That's for my family,"
Ruby said coldly. Boone hauled Dalton upright, none too gently. "And this is for 8 years of honest work you tried to steal." His fist connected solidly with Dalton's jaw, dropping the man unconscious. The gunfire outside was dying down. Dalton's men, seeing their leader captured and caught in crossfire, began throwing down weapons and surrendering. Ruby and Boone dragged the unconscious Dalton downstairs. In the main room, Marshall Hartley had the surrendered gunmen under guard, the Baxter brothers and Sam keeping weapons trained on them. Violet Thomas. Ruby ran to embrace her siblings properly. They clung together, all 3 crying now with relief and joy.
"I'm sorry,"
Violet sobbed.
I was so foolish, believing his lies.
Hush, Ruby murmured. You're safe. That's all that matters. Actually, Marshal Hartley interrupted gently, what matters is getting these criminals to jail and you folks to safety. This isn't quite over yet.
He was right, of course. There were statements to give, evidence to gather, trials to prepare for. But for now, in this moment, Ruby held her family close and felt the knot of fear and responsibility that had lived in her chest for years finally begin to ease. Boone stood quietly nearby, watching the reunion with a soft expression. When Ruby looked up and met his eyes, something passed between them, understanding, respect, and perhaps the beginning of something deeper. "Mr. Carter," Thomas said suddenly, breaking free from his sisters to approach Boone. "Ruby told me in her letters what kind of man you are. I'm sorry for all this trouble." "No need for apologies. Son, your sisters are lucky to have a brave young man looking out for them." Thomas stood a little taller at that. Maybe when this is settled, I could come work at your ranch, learn the cattle business." Boone glanced at Ruby, who gave a small nod. "I think that could be arranged. Always need good hands." "Well," Hartley said, looking at the captured outlaws with satisfaction, "this is a good day's work. Dalton's going to face justice in 3 territories now. Won't see sunlight for decades, if ever." As they prepared to leave the canyon, Violet approached Boone hesitantly. "Mr. Carter, I owe you an apology. The letters Ruby wrote, the promises made, were between your sister and me," Boone said gently but firmly. "Whatever happens next is our business to sort out." Violet looked between them, understanding dawning on her pretty face. Oh, I see." A small smile touched her lips, the first genuine one since her rescue. Ruby always did say things work out as they're meant to. The sun was setting as they made their way back to the horses, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. Ruby walked beside Boone, her rifle over her shoulder, her family safe, her burden shared at last. "So," she said quietly, "what happens now?" "The man who answered my letters wanted a wife, got himself a pack of trouble instead." "Seems to me," Boone replied, "I got exactly what those letters promised. Someone strong, clever, and caring. The rest is just details." Ruby stopped walking, studying his face. "You can't be serious. After all this deception?" "After all this truth," he corrected. "I've seen who you really are. Ruby Thompson. Question is, have you—" She had no answer for that. Not yet. But as they mounted up and headed home through the gathering dusk, Violet and Thomas safe with the marshal's protection, Ruby found herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, stepping off that stagecoach in her sister's place had been the rightest wrong thing she'd ever done. The stars were coming out, bright and clear in the vast western sky. Somewhere ahead lay town, justice and new beginnings. But for now, they rode through the peaceful night, and that was enough. The ride back to town took on a different quality as darkness deepened. Marshal Hartley led the group, his prisoners secured with ropes and sullen expressions. The Baxter brothers flanked them, rifles ready for any trouble. Behind them, the rescued party rode in exhausted silence. Ruby noticed Violet swaying in her saddle and moved her horse closer. "Just a little farther," she murmured. "I can manage," Violet replied, but her voice was thread-thin. The ordeal had taken more from her than she wanted to admit. Thomas rode between his sisters, trying to appear nonchalant despite the bruises darkening on his face. "That Dalton fellow kept saying you were dead. Ruby said he'd had you shot for interfering." "Takes more than his kind to stop me," Ruby said firmly. "Though I'll admit there were moments today when it was close." They were perhaps a mile from town when it happened. A shot rang out from the darkness, followed immediately by another. Marshal Hartley's horse reared, the lawman fighting to control it.
Ambush! Boone shouted, spurring his mount forward. Get to those rocks! More gunfire erupted from the hillside. In the chaos, Ruby saw one of the prisoners, a thin man with ferret-like features, working frantically at his bonds. Dalton might be unconscious and tied across a saddle, but his men weren't finished yet. Violet Thomas, with me. Ruby wheeled her horse toward a cluster of boulders, herding her siblings to safety. Behind them, the Baxter brothers had dismounted, returning fire at the muzzle flashes on the hill. They reached the rocks just as bullets whined overhead. Ruby pulled Violet from her horse, pushing her sister down behind cover. Thomas tumbled down beside them, his young face pale but determined. How many? Boone asked, sliding in beside Ruby. Blood ran from a graze on his cheek. Can't tell. 4, maybe 5. Ruby peered around the boulder. In the confusion, 2 of the prisoners had freed themselves and were running for the hills. They're getting away. Let them go, Hartley ordered, pressed against a neighboring rock. We keep the hostages safe and hold Dalton. That's what matters. But Ruby's attention had fixed on something else. The freed prisoner, the ferret-faced man, wasn't fleeing. Instead, he was creeping toward where Dalton lay unconscious, knife in hand. He's going to kill Dalton, Ruby realized. Silence him before he can testify. Without thinking, she broke from cover. Her rifle came up smoothly, the shot echoing across the night landscape. The ferret-faced man spun and fell, his knife clattering away. The gunfire from the hillside intensified, forcing Ruby to dive and roll. She felt the heat of a near miss, heard Boone cursing as he laid down covering fire. But she'd done what she needed. Dalton remained alive to face justice. Ruby Thompson, you're going to be the death of me. Boone grabbed her arm, hauling her back to safety. Someone had to stop him, she panted. Dead men tell no tales about railroad schemes and bought sheriffs. The firefight continued for several more minutes before the attackers apparently decided the game wasn't worth the candle. The gunfire slackened, then ceased. They could hear horses galloping away into the night. Everyone whole, Hartley called out. A chorus of affirmatives came back, though Sam had taken a bullet through the meat of his arm. Ruby immediately went to tend it, tearing strips from her already abused petticoat for bandages. Ma'am, you don't need to, Sam began. Hush. You got shot protecting my family. Least I can do is patch you up. Her hands were gentle but efficient as she bound the wound. They waited another tense half-hour before deeming it safe to continue. This time, Hartley took no chances. Outriders swept ahead into the flanks, watching for another ambush. But they reached town without further incident. The lights of civilization never more welcome. Doc Winters was roused again, this time to tend Sam's arm properly and examine the Thompson siblings. Violet had bruises from rough handling but was otherwise unharmed. Thomas's split lip and black eye looked dramatic but weren't serious. You're lucky, the doctor told Ruby as he cleaned a graze on her arm. She hadn't even noticed. Could have been much worse. It nearly was, she admitted quietly. The jail quickly filled with Dalton and his remaining men. Judge Chen was summoned despite the late hour, taking statements and ensuring everything was properly documented. It was near midnight before they finished. Miss Thompson, Judge Chen said as they prepared to leave, your testimony will be crucial when this comes to trial. You and your siblings will need to remain in the area. We have nowhere else to go, Ruby said simply. The farm back in Cedar Falls is lost to creditors. Actually, Boone spoke up. About that, seems to me you folks need a place to stay. I've got that big house with empty rooms. You'd be doing me a favor, having someone to look after things while I'm working cattle. Violet looked uncertain, but Thomas's face lit up. Really, Mr. Carter, we could stay at your ranch. If your sister agrees. Boone met Ruby's eyes steadily. No obligations, just neighbors helping neighbors until you get your feet under you. Ruby felt heat rise in her cheeks. That's very generous.
But people will talk. An unmarried woman staying at a bachelor's ranch.
Then we'll make it proper. Marshal Hartley interjected with a slight smile. I'll bunk there too until the trial. Federal protection for key witnesses. Can't have anyone saying it's improper with a marshal in residence.
It was neatly done. Ruby had to admit, a solution that protected both reputation and safety. Then we accept with gratitude. They rode out to the ranch as a group, exhaustion weighing heavy on everyone. But as they crested the final ridge and saw the house standing solid and welcoming in the moonlight, Ruby felt something ease in her chest.
"It's beautiful,"
Violet breathed. "Just like you described in your letters?" Ruby flushed. She had indeed waxed poetic about the ranch in her correspondence, drawn from Boone's descriptions and her own imagination. To see it proven true was unsettling. Inside, Boone quickly organized sleeping arrangements. Violet would take the guest room he'd prepared for his bride, a fact that made everyone slightly uncomfortable. Thomas would bunk with Sam and Tom once the wounded cowhand was settled. Hartley took a small room near the stairs, strategically positioned to watch all comings and goings. "And you?" Ruby asked Boone as he showed her to another guest room. "I'll bed down in the barn. Done it plenty of times when we had visiting cattle buyers." "That's not necessary." "It is." His voice was firm. "You've been through enough today without worrying about propriety. Get some rest. Ruby, tomorrow we can figure out the rest." But Ruby found sleep elusive. She lay in the comfortable bed far nicer than anything at their old farm and stared at the ceiling. So much had changed in just 2 days. The adventure she'd never wanted had found her anyway, bringing danger and violence, but also something else, something she wasn't ready to name yet. A soft knock at her door made her sit up. "Come in." It was Violet, wrapped in a borrowed nightgown, looking younger than her 20 years. She perched on the edge of Ruby's bed, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. "I need to say something," Violet began. "About the letters, about running away, about everything."
"Violet."
"No, please, let me—" Violet took a deep breath. "I know what you sacrificed for us. Not just these past days, but always. Taking care of us. Giving up your own chances. You're my family. It's what's done. But I never made it easy. Did I, always wanting pretty things we couldn't afford? Dreaming of rescue instead of facing reality?" Violet's eyes filled with tears. "When Dalton came, promising everything I'd dreamed of, I believed him because I wanted to, even when doubt crept in. I went because I was too proud to admit I'd been fooled." Ruby pulled her sister into a hug. "We all make mistakes. Lord knows I've made plenty." "Have you?" Violet pulled back, studying Ruby's face. "Because from where I sit, you've done everything right, including—" She gestured vaguely at the house around them. This was meant for you." "No." Violet's voice grew firm. "Those letters you wrote, they came from your heart, the way you described this place. The life that could be built here that was your dream. Ruby, not mine. I just happened to be the pretty face in the photograph." Ruby couldn't deny the truth in that. She had poured herself into those letters, creating a vision of partnership and purpose that called to something deep in her soul. "Mr. Carter is a good man," Violet continued. "The way he looks at you, it's not disappointment at getting the wrong sister. It's recognition, like he's seeing the person he was really writing to all along." "It's too complicated," Ruby protested. "Too much has happened, or exactly enough has happened." Violet squeezed her hand. "For once in your life, Ruby, consider what you want, not what's proper or practical or best for everyone else. What do you want?" After Violet left, Ruby stood at her window, looking out at the moonlit yard. In the barn, a light still glowed Boone, probably checking on the horses one last time. She thought about his steady presence during the gunfight, his quick acceptance of her family, his insistence that she'd given him exactly what the letters promised. What did she want? For so long, Want had been a luxury she couldn't afford. But now, with her siblings safe and a new life stretching before them, perhaps it was time to find out. A sound from outside caught her attention. Boone was leaving the barn, but instead of heading to his makeshift bed, he stood in the yard, looking up at the star-filled sky. Even from this distance, she could see the weariness in his shoulders, the solitary set of his figure. Before she could think better of it, Ruby grabbed a shawl and slipped downstairs. The night air was cool against her skin as she crossed the yard. Boone turned at her approach, surprise flickering across his features.
Couldn't sleep.
Too much in my head.
She pulled the shawl tighter.
You...
Same. He gestured at the sky. Sometimes looking at all that vastness helps put things in perspective. They stood in comfortable silence, the night sounds of the ranch surrounding them, horses shifting in their stalls, the distant howl of a coyote, the whisper of wind through grass.
I owe you an apology,
Ruby said finally.
Several, actually.
No, you don't. I do. She turned to face him. I deceived you, brought danger to your door, disrupted the life you'd built here, and saved me from a different kind of danger. Boone interrupted. Dalton would have come from my land regardless. Without you, I'd have faced it alone and unprepared. Instead, I had a partner who could shoot straight and think faster. Partner. The word hung between them, weighted with possibility. Is that what we are? Ruby asked softly. Partners. 6 months had passed since the night of Dalton's capture, and the Carson Valley Ranch had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The early October sun cast long shadows across the expanded garden where Ruby worked, her hands deep in the rich soil as she harvested the last of the season's vegetables. Aunt Ruby. Look what I found. Young Mary Baxter came running, her 5-year-old hands cupped around a monarch butterfly. Careful now, Ruby said gently, setting aside her basket. Hold it loose so you don't hurt its wings. The child had been staying at the ranch for 2 weeks while her father, one of the Baxter brothers who'd helped in the rescue, recovered from a logging accident. It seemed the Carson Ranch had become something of a haven for folks in need. From the corral, she could hear Thomas working with the horses, his voice confident as he guided a yearling through its paces. The boy had grown 2 inches and filled out considerably under the combination of regular meals and hard work. Boone had proven a patient teacher, and Thomas had taken to ranch life like he'd been born to it.
Ruby,
Violet called from the house. The new schoolmaster's here for lunch. Ruby smiled, brushing dirt from her hands. Violet had surprised everyone by taking a position as assistant teacher at the newly built school in town. The delicate flower had discovered she had a gift for working with children and a quick mind for figures. More surprisingly, she'd caught the eye of James Hartley, no longer needed as protection but finding reasons to extend his stay in the area. Inside, the kitchen bustled with activity. Violet had become a fine cook under Ruby's tutelage, and the smell of fresh bread and beef stew filled the air. The new schoolmaster, a young man named David Chen, Judge Chen's nephew, newly arrived from San Francisco, sat at the table, clearly smitten as Violet served the meal. Miss Thompson, he said to Ruby, your sister tells me you're the one who taught her mathematics. Have you considered teaching yourself? My hands are full enough here, Ruby replied, taking her seat. Besides, one teacher in the family is plenty. Through the window, she could see Boone and Sam bringing in the horses for the midday rest. Her heart did that peculiar skip it had developed whenever she saw him, a reaction that hadn't faded despite the months of shared days and comfortable evenings. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm, she and Boone, partners in truth now, managing the ranch together. Though nothing formal had been spoken between them, the community had accepted the arrangement, especially after Marshal Hartley's testimony at Dalton's trial had painted Ruby as a heroine who'd saved the whole valley from a criminal conspiracy. Dalton himself was serving 25 years in federal prison. His testimony had exposed a network of corruption reaching into the territorial government itself.
The railroad had been forced to renegotiate its routes, paying fair prices to landowners instead of stealing through intimidation. Morrison had recovered from his wound and retained his position as sheriff, chastened but wiser. "Afternoon, everyone," Boone said, entering with an easy smile. His eyes found Ruby's first, as they always did, warming with something that made her cheeks heat. Mr. Carter." David Chen stood respectfully. "I was just telling the ladies how impressed I am with what you've built here." "We've built," Boone corrected, taking his usual seat beside Ruby. "Wouldn't be half what it is without the Thompson family." After lunch, as the others dispersed to their various tasks, Ruby found herself alone with Boone on the porch. It had become their custom, these stolen moments between the day's demands. "Hartley asked me something interesting this morning," Boone said, whittling a piece of wood into what would become a toy horse for Mary. "Oh." "Wanted to know when I was going to make an honest woman of you." Ruby's hands stilled on her mending. "What did you tell him?" "That honest women can't be made, they just are. And you're the most honest person I know." "That's not what he meant." "I know what he meant." Boone set down his whittling, turning to face her fully. "Question is, what do you mean? What do you want?" "Ruby." It was the same question Violet had asked months ago, and Ruby still struggled with the answer. Not because she didn't know she'd known for months now what her heart wanted, but saying it aloud, claiming it, still felt like stepping off a cliff. "The trial's over," she said carefully. "There's nothing keeping us here anymore. We could go anywhere, start fresh." "Is that what you want to leave?" "No." The word came out firm and certain. "This is home now. For all of us. Thomas has found his calling. Violet has her school and her suitor. And I. And you." Ruby met his eyes squarely. "I have a garden that needs tending, livestock that know my voice, a house that feels like mine. I have work that matters and people who matter more." She took a breath. "I have you, in whatever way you'll have me." Boone's chair scraped as he moved closer, taking her work-worn hands in his. "Ruby Thompson, I started falling for you the moment you stepped off that stage, all fire and determination. Every day since has just confirmed what I knew then. You're the partner I was looking for, even if I was too fool to realize it at first." "I wasn't Violet," Ruby felt compelled to point out. "Thank God for that. Violet's a sweet girl, but sweetness alone doesn't build a life out here. I need someone strong beside me, someone who can shoot straight and speak straighter, someone who sees what needs doing and does it without fuss or complaint." "Sounds like you're describing a ranch hand, not a wife." Boone laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Maybe that's what a frontier wife is, the best ranch hand you'll ever have. Plus someone to warm your bed and fill your heart. Someone to build dreams with and weather storms beside. Someone to raise children with, God willing." "Children." The word sent a flutter through Ruby's stomach. "That's a lot to ask of someone." "It is," he agreed solemnly. "Which is why I'm not asking lightly. I know you've spent your life taking care of others, putting their needs first. I'm not looking to add to that burden. I'm looking to share it. True partners. In everything." Ruby studied their joined hands, his calloused from rope and leather, hers from soil and sun. Working hands. Both of them. Building hands.
"The letters,"
she said suddenly. "The ones I wrote. Did you keep them?"
"Everyone."
They were lies, pretending to be someone else. "Were they?" Boone squeezed her hands gently. "Seems to me they were the truest things you ever wrote. Your hopes, your dreams, your vision of what life could be. Only name that was false was the signature." Mary's laughter rang out from the garden where Thomas was pushing her on the swing Boone had built. Violet's voice drifted from the kitchen, explaining something to David Chen. The ranch hummed with life and purpose. "I'm not an easy woman," Ruby warned. "I speak my mind. I have opinions about everything. and I won't simper or defer just to stroke a man's pride. If I wanted easy, I'd have stayed a bachelor, and if I wanted simpering, I wouldn't have fallen for the woman who charged into gunfire to save her family. Boone's thumb traced circles on her palm. I want you, Ruby, just as you are. Even with all the deception the way we started, maybe especially because of that, you did what you had to do to save your family. Can't fault someone for that. And if you hadn't, we'd never have met. Violet would have come, been unhappy, probably left within a year. Instead, we got tested by fire right from the start. We know we can face trouble together. Ruby felt the last of her resistance crumble.
You know I love you.
It was the first time either had said the words aloud. Though they'd been dancing around them for months, Boone's face lit with a joy that transformed his weathered features. And I love you, Ruby Thompson, have since you stood in my parlor, fierce as a mother wolf, ready to face down whatever threatened your own. He stood, pulling her up with him, and suddenly she was in his arms. The kiss was everything their partnership had been strong, sure, and promising a lifetime of shared purpose. When they broke apart, both breathless, Ruby found herself laughing. What will people say, the wrong sister ending up with the groom? They'll say we're proof that God works in mysterious ways, that sometimes the wrong road leads to exactly the right destination. Mr. Carter. Thomas called from the corral. That buyer from Fort Laramie is here about the horses. Duty calls, Boone said ruefully. It always does. Ruby smoothed his shirt collar, a wifely gesture that felt natural as breathing. But we've got time, all the time in the world. Is that a yes? That's a yes to everything. Partnership, marriage, children, growing old on this land together. Yes to morning coffee and evening silences. Yes to hard work and shared dreams. She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. Yes to you, Boone Carter. Then we'd best tell the family. Thomas has been pestering me about when I was going to propose for weeks now. Boy's got opinions about everything. Wonder where he gets that from. Ruby laughed, linking her arm through his. We'd also better write to Marshal Hartley. If he's going to court my sister properly, he should know she's about to have a brother-in-law who'll be watching his intentions. Already like how you think. Mrs. Soon-to-be Carter. As they walked toward the corral together, Ruby glanced back at the house that had sheltered so many dreams. In the window, she could see Violet watching with a knowing smile. Her sister raised a hand in blessing, and Ruby returned it. The afternoon sun painted everything golden, the house, the barn, the endless grassland stretching to the mountains. It looked like a painting, Ruby thought, like something from a storybook. But this was real, built on truth finally told, trust hard won, and love discovered in the most unexpected place, not the delicate romance of pressed flowers and poetry she'd imagined in those letters, but something stronger, a love that could weather storms and build kingdoms in the wilderness. Ready, partner? Boone asked, and the word held all their future promises. Ready? Ruby confirmed. And together they walked toward whatever came next, partners in truth at last. The evening sun painted the valley in shades of amber and rose as Ruby stood in the garden she had tended for 3 years now. Her hand rested protectively on her rounded belly, feeling the strong kicks of the child within. From the house came the sound of laughter. Violet and James Hartley had arrived for Sunday dinner with their twin boys, and Thomas was regaling them with stories of his latest adventures in horse training. Mrs. Carter, you shouldn't be working in your condition. Sam's wife, Martha, approached with a basket, having come to help with the harvest. They'd married last spring, and she'd proven a welcome addition to their growing ranch family. Movement is good for me, Ruby replied, though she allowed Martha to take the heavier vegetables. Besides, this child is going to be born knowing the smell of good earth and honest work. Through the kitchen window, She could see Boone bouncing one of Violet's boys on his knee while the other climbed on Thomas's back. Her heart swelled at the sight. He'd taken to unclehood with the same steady competence he brought to everything, and she knew he'd be a wonderful father.
"Ruby,"
Violet called from the porch.
"James has news from town."
They gathered in the parlor, the room now filled with comfortable furniture and family photographs. Judge Chen's retirement portrait held pride of place, a gift from when he'd performed Ruby and Boone's wedding ceremony 2.5 years prior. The territorial legislature passed it, James announced, his marshal's badge catching the light. Full statehood for Wyoming Territory, and with it, proper schools in every district.
They're asking for your recommendations on teachers. Violet.
Violet beamed with pride. At 23, she'd become the head of the Regional Education Committee, traveling to help establish schools in growing settlements. Marriage and motherhood hadn't dimmed her newfound purpose, if anything. They'd given her more determination to ensure all children had opportunities to learn.
"That's wonderful news,"
Ruby said, easing into her rocking chair, the same one Boone had bought in hopeful preparation years ago. Education makes all the difference. Look at Thomas. Her brother, now 17 and tall as Boone, grinned. Speaking of which, I got my own news. Mr. Standish from the Double Bar Ranch offered to sell me 20 acres of his borderland. With what I've saved and the colts I've been training, I can afford it.
"You're leaving?"
Violet asked, concern in her voice. Not leaving, just expanding. Thomas corrected. I'll build my own place, but I'll still work with Boone. Partners, like we discussed. He looked to Boone for confirmation.
"Boy's got a gift with horses."
Boone confirmed.
"Makes sense to give him room to grow his own operation.
Besides," he smiled at Ruby, "we'll be needing his room here soon enough." The conversation turned to plans and dreams, the comfortable talk of family planning for the future. Ruby found her thoughts drifting to another evening. 3 years passed, when she'd stood in the yard with Boone, uncertain of what she wanted or deserved, how far they'd all come from that desperate flight from Cedar Falls. Later, after the Hartleys had departed and Thomas had retired to the bunkhouse, Ruby and Boone sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. It had become their evening ritual, these quiet moments between the day's end and sleep. "Regrets?" Boone asked softly, his hand finding hers. "About what?" "Any of it. The way we started, the dangers we faced, the life we've built." Ruby considered the question seriously, as she did all his questions. "I regret the deception at the beginning. I regret that fear and desperation drove us to it, but regret the results? Never. Even when you're swollen with child and your back aches." She laughed, rubbing the spot in question.
"Especially then, this child was made in love and honesty.
Boone, that's worth any discomfort." He helped her to her feet, steadying her with the same care he'd shown from the beginning. "Speaking of the little one, Doc Winters says everything looks good."
"Strong and healthy, just like their papa."
She leaned into his solid presence.
"He thinks maybe another month."
"We'll need to settle on names soon."
"I was thinking,"
Ruby said carefully,
"if it's a boy,
maybe Frederick after your brother." Boone's arms tightened around her.
"He'd have liked that. And if it's a girl?"
"Margaret after my mother. Maggie for short. Good strong names, for what will no doubt be a strong child, given their mother." They stood together, looking out over their land. The ranch had prospered beyond their early dreams. The cattle numbered in the hundreds now. The horse operation Thomas ran was becoming known throughout the territory, and the expanded garden fed not just their family but provided produce for the growing town.
"I used to stand here,"
Ruby said quietly, wondering if I'd made the worst mistake of my life, dragging my family into danger, deceiving a good man, reaching for something that wasn't meant for me. And now I know the truth. Every hard choice, every desperate gamble, every moment of fear, they were all steps on the path to this, to us, to home." A coyote called in the distance, answered by another. The ranch dog stirred but didn't bark, recognizing no threat in the familiar sound. Inside, the house settled with comfortable creaks and sighs, full of life and memory.
The man who advertised for a bride, Ruby mused. Did he get what he bargained for?
Boone turned her to face him, his eyes warm with love and humor. He got more than he ever dared hope for: a partner, a friend, a lover, a mother for his children. Someone who can shoot straight, speak true, and build dreams from prairie dust and determination.
Sounds like quite a woman.
She is, though she started as the wrong sister off a stagecoach. Ruby smiled, remembering that day, the fear, the uncertainty, the desperate hope that somehow she could save her family. She had saved them, though not in any way she could have imagined.
Maybe,
she said, there was no wrong sister. Maybe there was just the sister who was meant to be here all along, the one who could meet Marcus Dalton with a rifle, face down hired guns, and still have hands gentle enough to tend a garden and a heart big enough to love a stubborn rancher.
Stubborn
as a mule. Lucky for you. I like mules. They're reliable.
Boone laughed, the sound carrying across the peaceful valley. Come on, Mrs. Carter. Let's get you inside before this little one decides to make an early appearance.
As they walked back into their home, Ruby paused at the threshold. Once, she had stood at a different door, pretending to be someone else, carrying the weight of deception and family duty. Now she crossed her own threshold, fully herself, carrying new life and surrounded by love. "What is it?" Boone asked, concerned by her stillness.
"Just remembering and being grateful." "For what?"
"For wrong turns that lead to right destinations. For letters written in another's name that spoke my own heart. For a man wise enough to see past the deception to the truth beneath." She touched his face gently.
"For you, Boone Carter. For us. For all of it."
He kissed her then, there in their doorway, with the stars watching and the night wind singing through the grass. When they finally went inside, the house welcomed them with warmth and light, ready to shelter whatever new chapters their story would bring. In the distance, a train whistle sounded the new railway line that now brought prosperity instead of threat to the valley. Times were changing, the wild frontier slowly giving way to civilization. But here on the Carson Valley Ranch, some things remained: constant hard work, deep love, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as the biggest mistakes. Ruby's hand went again to her belly, feeling the future stir within her. Soon there would be another Carter to carry on the legacy they'd built, a child born not from deception but from truth, not from desperation but from love. "Ready for bed?" Boone asked, banking the fire.
"In a moment."
Ruby moved to the window, looking out one last time at the land that had become her life. Just thinking how different it all could have been. If Violet had actually come, if Dalton hadn't interfered, if I hadn't gotten on that stage, then I'd have likely had a pretty unhappy wife who couldn't shoot, couldn't work, and couldn't stand up to whatever life threw at us. Boone said firmly, "I thank God every day for sending me the wrong sister, or rather, for sending me exactly the right woman at exactly the right time." Ruby smiled, peace settling over her like a warm blanket. "Then I suppose we both got what we needed, if not what we thought we wanted." "No supposing about it," Boone said, taking her hand. "Now come on. Morning comes early, and that little one needs rest even if you don't." As they climbed the stairs together, Ruby thought about the journey that had brought them here. From desperate letters to a desperate flight. From gunfire to garden soil. From deception to truth deeper than any mere facts could convey. It hadn't been the story she'd planned to write, but it had become the life she was meant to live. And that, she thought, as she prepared for sleep in the arms of the man who'd become her everything, was the greatest truth of all. Sometimes the wrong person stepping off a stagecoach turns out to be exactly the right person to step into your life.
Sometimes lies lead to truth. Sometimes the hardest road leads to the happiest home. The baby kicked again, strong and sure, and Ruby smiled in the darkness. Another Carter, another story waiting to unfold. But that was tomorrow's chapter. Tonight, there was only gratitude, love, and the quiet breathing of the man beside her, the cowboy who'd ordered a slim bride but got a partner for life instead. In the end, they'd both gotten exactly what they needed each other. Thank you so much for joining me on this Wild West adventure. I hope you enjoyed following Ruby and Boone's journey from that fateful meeting at the stagecoach to their happy ending. Where are you listening to this story from? I'd love to hear from listeners around the world. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Ruby and Boone's romance in the comments below. Did you see the twists coming? What was your favorite moment? Let's discuss this tale of love, courage, and finding your true destiny in the untamed frontier.